session. So thank you all for coming. My name is Barry Currier. I'm the Deputy Consultant on Legal Education at the American Bar Association. And my colleague Rick Morgan and I are here to do really sort of a schizoid hour. Rick is the person at our office who created, developed, implemented, manages, supports, and encourages all of our questionnaires and so forth. And many of you I know work with him over the years. You need to file those reports. Rick's going to start off and talk about a little bit about the questionnaires, what's happening now, where we're going with them, and so forth. And then I'm going to come up and talk a little bit about the accreditation requirements as they relate to technology and distance education. We've agreed we'll take 10 to 15 minutes each to sort of talk, which should leave us a fair amount of time for conversation. We have no idea whether you all want to talk about questionnaires or whether you want to talk about distance education and accreditation. And we agreed that if half of you wanted to do one and half the other, that we might even suggest that one half of you go over there and the other half over here, and we can have two conversations. Because those who are here for one might not be terribly interested in the other. So we'll see how that goes after we each give a little bit of an opening spiel. Rick, being our technology person, will be using the technology. I use technology to create a handout, which I will pass around, and I'll do that while Rick is talking. And so, Rick Morgan.
Thank you, Barry. I think if I use my outside voice, I can probably avoid using the microphone. So if you can't hear me, just tell me to put the microphone on.
Don't they record these sessions?
Yeah.
Jonathan, is there anything you know you're supposed to do?
Yep.
Okay.
Go for it.
Is that coming through?
No.
Is it coming through?
Yeah.
Whenever I'm asked to talk about this particular project, I always feel it's appropriate to give a little bit of a history of it. Hang on. I had this problem earlier. Is there a tech person?
Just hit the help media button.
Just confirms everyone's view about the ADA and technology.
Help media?
Yeah, right on the right side of the that box right there. Contact media. If you hit that, there's no running.
Media services. Because I've got. Where's your? Is it showing? It's right here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Thanks.
How many to take on the change line?
Okay. The section of legal education has been actually collecting data from law schools since back in the 20s and 30s. Fortunately, in 1988, they came out with an electronic version that brought the data back to us in database format. Now, the downside of that is that the questionnaire back in 1988 in that era was a totally different animal, and a lot of the questions we were asking then we don't ask now, and vice versa. So we do have data from every law school going back to 1988, but there are some holes, so to speak, in the data. And then in 1997, we rolled out what we continue to support now. We call it the ABA CIS, and it's a Windows-based system, multi-user, so that you can put it on the network and just share it out and let your different users have access to it. And another feature that makes it nice is that it adds a record to the database every year at the school level, so that once you're up for a sabbatical inspection, then the site questionnaire module can go over and pull that data across and format it into the various statistics that you need to produce for a sabbatical inspection. And prior to 1997, when we rolled that out, you had to produce all those statistics manually and very burdensome on the schools. So we've tried for a long time to try to ease the burden of submitting data on an annual basis, and then once you do that, how we can make it help you when you're up for a sabbatical inspection. And I know this is not the exact group to talk about specifics of the questionnaire and features and whatnot, so I'll just let you know that we have some training coming up for end users, primarily of the system. We try to do this every couple of years, and we'll be going through how to navigate through the system, how to use it, and also taking some substantive questions. Why do you ask that question? How does that apply to the standards and that sort of thing? And we'll be doing that in Chicago, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. all in August. And I've got this little URL that I put out there with some more information about the 3 training sessions. I will go ahead and say that the major changes this year to the system are in the area of the financial aid questionnaire. We have been asked for a long time about average debt loads of students coming into law school and leaving law school, and we've never had that information really that we felt was accessible, so we didn't ask the schools to go after it. But through consultations with Access Group and various financial aid directors, we now have revised the financial aid questionnaire pretty significantly and added this as a part. Also, if you know anything about the financial aid questionnaire, for every question we're always asking you for an estimated dollar volume as well as last year's actuals, and we did away with all the estimated references. So again, in an effort to make it easier to fill out and only bring back the information we really use. So, and the other sort of notable change this year is in how we're counting applications at law schools. If you're a dual division school and you allow students to apply to both a full-time and part-time division in the same admissions cycle, we're going to have you then calculate an unduplicated total of applications for that cycle. Up to this point, there hasn't been a total that you would deliver. You just put in the full-time and the part-time applications, and we'd add them together. So we're trying to get a little cleaner data in that area. I have been asked over the past year or two, when are we going to come out with a web version of the ABA software so you don't have to maintain it at your schools, and we are thinking about it. I think we feel like we're running alongside a train trying to decide when the best point is to jump on, and it seems that the Foreign Summer Program module that is part of the ABA CIS, we rolled it out a couple of years ago, might be a good candidate to have as a web-enabled application. Reason being is the directors of the Foreign Summer Programs that fill this part of the questionnaire out, oftentimes they're not on site anyway, so they could just get on the internet, go to the website, and fill out the questionnaire for their school. And let me just underscore that if your school does run a Foreign Summer Program, you do indeed have to submit it through the current ABA CIS. There's sort of the force of inertia where there's, I think, some resistance to get on board and do it the way that you do the annual JD questionnaire, just because for so many years we've allowed the directors to simply email us a Word or WordPerfect copy of the questionnaire, and that's that. But now that we have everything in database format, we've got to have it submitted through the ABA CIS program. Some other things we're doing with the data that come back to us is this year you may be aware that we went in a joint venture with LSAC, and instead of us publishing our consumer guide and them publishing their official guide, we now just have one book, and it's the official guide to ABA-approved law schools. We call it the 509 guide because it ties back to the standard 509. And it's been out for a month or so, and it's about 900 pages of anything and everything you'd want to know about ABA-approved law schools. Essentially, there's 4 pages for each school. It's the 2 ABA statistical pages and then the 2 LSAC pages. Another byproduct of that effort is that the data that we provided them to publish in the book is now in searchable format on their website. And if I can toggle over there real quick. We can do a couple of quick searches. We were careful when we were giving them guidelines to develop this little tool so that any of the search parameters within the 509 guide, which the data on the web are limited to what's in that book, at least for this year, we were careful to not set the parameters such that it would single out any school in any way. So each parameter in and of itself wouldn't return just one school. Now you can, of course, set multiple parameters and narrow down the search, but you can just go through here and click, click any of these radio buttons. Let's see if that returns something. And that returns the list of schools similar to the charts that are in the book. And we're thinking that the prospective users of this will probably be students, prospective students, and so that's what it's kind of geared toward.
Rick, there's a lot of zeros there. This is a beta site, right? So, I mean, at this point, this is not available to the general public until you guys get it ready.
Well, this is,
right?
I think these zeros are just because that's in the part-time division, and those schools don't have part-time programs. And this is very new, and it's really not even out on their production site yet. So, but this is some things that we're trying to do with our data. That come out of the ABA CIS.
So we can go to it now, or we can't yet?
No, you can't. It's not active on their website yet.
They just sent us sort of a URL that we can go and poke around in it and and then get back to them and say, yeah, we like it, or let's make a couple of changes here. And
it'll be ready in a couple of weeks. It's just being tweaked.
So, and again, it's limited to the data that are in the book, which is, a lot, but we may in next
Year or the year after that, expand the data as well. I get this question quite a bit every year. It seems like, particularly from the network people, the computer support people, our AV software is just gone. I don't know what happened to it, but it's gone. And you don't need to panic in that situation because I've got a utility that goes out and reads these master database tables and pulls the records for your school and dumps them into an installation, and I can zip that up and FTP it or email it to you. So I figured since I had the tech people here, it'd be a good time to say, don't panic. If, in a couple of months, it's time to work on the questionnaire, and it's just gone poof for some reason. I probably restored about 30 school systems last fall, just for one reason or another, they didn't have it. So the other thing on your users, as far as permissions, to the ABA root directory and below, they need full control. And a lot of schools also think it's a good idea to rename that root directory, which it doesn't really matter, but I recommend you don't, because any communication you get from me about upgrading it the next time is going to assume, it's not been renamed, and it'll just be easier to find if you just leave it ABA_CIS. And also, every year, there's no need to create another directory and drag everything in that, and then for fear of, losing last year's data or whatever. There's no point in doing that because all the data reside in the installation, and I can restore it all for you anyway. And if you have multiple occurrences of this thing lying around, it just leads to problems. So you really only need one installation of it, preferably on a server that users have access to. Give them full control to the ABA, CIS, and below, and leave it at that. Only one installation, and it is important to upgrade every year, because invariably this upgrade is going to build on something we did in last year's upgrade. So it's not like you can run WordPerfect 5.1 for 10 years and then go out and buy the new one. You need to take the baby steps. It's also a good idea to get on the APA Questionnaire listserv if you have any involvement in this project. My goal is to get at least one person at every school on the listserv, because if there is some sort of problem that we need to resolve or get some sort of message out quickly, this is the first place we go. And at the end of my slides here, I'll put up my email address. All you need to do is send me an email and I can put you on. It's a listserv that's dead for 9 months out of the year, but during the fall, when people are working on it, it's real helpful. It's been a little busy lately because of all the training questions going around, but this is my contact information, morganr@staff.abnet.org, and again, you can just email me. Open up for questions now.
Let me do my thing, and then we'll see how people want to go. And I might say, as we get going, I am thrilled to see Rick Morgan, 750 North Lakeshore Drive. As some of you who follow our history know, we have been moving, and Rick has been in Indianapolis, and as of Monday, he'll officially be full-time at the ABA office in Chicago, and the Indianapolis office is closing down a bit at a time. So, Rick, how do I get to the camera, to the lights, so I can turn the lights? Okay, thank you. Rick does a great job. I might tell just one quick little story. When we were at the Department of Education in December, we have to get approved as we have to be accredited to be the accrediting agency. And that's been a battle over the last few years. We were at the hearing. Bob Scott, who's the now retired Dean of Virginia, actually was supportive of our petition to be approved, but said we continue. He's the president of something called ALDA, the American Law Deans Association, which is not generally in favor of regulation, information gathering, and the like. And Bob was saying, well, we'd still like them to simplify what they ask for. So I have one person whose full-time job is to reply to the ABA questionnaire. I pay that person $75,000, and each of us in the room looked around and said, I'll take that job. I think because at least when I was dean, my secretary basically shepherded that process, working with Rick, and if somebody's spending an entire year filling out that questionnaire, they really type very, very slowly. Another, of course, interesting piece of that is what data should we collect, how much should we collect, and what should we do with it? As I'm sure all of you know, we get surveyed by so many different people, and I think one of the good things about what happens at the ABA is that's a central place for data to be gathered. And more people are saying, you know, I don't want to respond to that survey. We already give that information to the ABA. And people will call our office. If we can't answer it, Rick can usually run through some numbers and get some data that help people. And it's really amazing how many calls, I've been there now 9 months, come in from people, the press, all sorts of people wanting data and information about legal education. And it probably makes sense for there to be one place where that information is gathered. But what I want to do is just talk for a second about accreditation and technology. For anyone who came in late, there are a few handouts down toward the front. And I'm just going to walk through this. One of the first sessions that I attended here, I heard someone say something about, well, we would do more, but the ABA accreditation rules block us from doing that. And that's kind of where I want to start, because I'm not sure that that's true. And I say that as somebody that has come to the ABA only recently. I have a job that blows up after 2 years and I have to leave. So, you know, I'm not an ABA lifer. I say to people I don't wear my ABA blazer to work. I do work there. I believe in accreditation. It could be done by somebody other than the ABA, but that's where it is done. And I think sometimes it's easy to look for an enemy outside. And as it was Pogo who said, you know, we've met the enemy and he is us. There is no ABA, you know, we are the ABA. And there's plenty of opportunity for people to get involved and to try to work on things that bother them about the accreditation standards. So I would just encourage you to read the rules, be open-minded, push the envelope, and then if it doesn't work, blame the ABA. So just very briefly, what do the accreditation standards require for a JD program to be approved by the ABA? Well, first of all, you only have to have 80 credits. The standards talk about 56,000 minutes. That's basically an 80-credit program. All law schools in the United States, except one or maybe two, require a lot more than 80 credits. So that comes up a little bit later in the puzzle. 80 credit minimum. The standards sort of assume that those 80 credits are going to be in a regular old classroom like this, with people with hard copies of books and a faculty member up in front of the room. And Standard 304G has for a long time precluded correspondence courses, correspondence education. And as distance education came a little more onto the horizon, I believe that standard was amended. I mean, it now reads and says something specific about distance education is not allowed except in accordance with these temporary guidelines that we'll talk about in a second. So the standards assume a classroom environment. There's some exception made in Standard 305 for study outside the classroom, clinics, externships, and the like. And that standard says you've got to have 45,000 minutes, that's about 65 credits, in regular classroom environments, and the rest of it can be outside the class. So it's not 45/56, it's just 45,000 minutes. So basically everything you do over 65 credits at your law school, let's say your law school requires 90 credits to graduate, you can have 25 units of credits for study outside the classroom. Clinics, externships, study in other parts of the university, and the like, and that's now allowed. You also have some flexibility under these temporary guidelines for distance education. So what do those guidelines talk about? How do the standards currently address the use of technology? I went to school in California in the 60s. That has some influence on how I read things. I just don't think they're nearly as restrictive as I hear people saying. And I've heard people saying here at this conference, the back last couple of pages are the memo to the deans that was sent out a few years ago by Jim White, together with the temporary guidelines, which are on the very last page of the handout. There are four parts, four pieces, basically, of these temporary guidelines that you need to pay attention to. Number one, the site of reception. And basically what that says, none of this is necessarily worded as I would word it, but basically as I understand what this says, anything that is received in a law school does not need to be approved by the ABA. If the site of reception of the program is a law school with a faculty, a library, and a building, then you do not need any approval to offer that. Yeah.
I asked a question about that a couple of years back, the last time there was a meeting of this sort, and I was told that that's not true, that it has to be synchronous.
Well, but now I'm the one interpreting this. For the next 2 years, I went to school in California in the 60s, and the way I read this, and I would take it the way you would read it.
Right.
And we should talk about this, and that's what I mean about pushing the envelope.
Right.
But if you read this, it says if it's received at a law school. So, I mean, I would take it that, you could be sitting in your office over there or at home. We could have 100 people in here with their computers, and you basically could be running a chat room with 100 people sitting here.
That's synchronous again.
That's synchronous. I understand. That would be okay.
Right.
And then it starts to bleed away. And then, it's silly to make everybody drag their desktop computers and 17-inch monitors to this classroom. So what's the difference if they're not talking to each other anyway? We have a rule that says you can't talk in this classroom. So everybody can be in the library. Is that okay? Well, then can you be at the wireless environment where it's 50 feet outside the building? Can you be there? And if you can be there, why can't you all be at home? So, you just start thinking that these standards, these guidelines are not at all robust enough to deal with what people want to do. But you just start with that if it's the site of reception is a law school, then theoretically anyway, you don't need approval. Difference between synchronous, asynchronous, understood. Okay. Second, externships and clinical programs, that's fairly obvious. Number 4, level of program. This one is interesting to me. Consideration will be given to the program for which the distance education is offered. Thus, post-JD programs may be considered differently. Now, if you look at Standard 307, Standard 307 says the ABA doesn't approve anything other than JD programs. As far as I'm concerned, that means the ABA has no business telling you can't have an online post-JD, LLM, SJD, non-law programs aimed at other than lawyers. And I've been to 3 accreditation committee meetings so far. We've had 1 or 2 online programs or programs that are currently not online but intend to go online. Come before the council, come before the accreditation committee and the council. Some people are receptive, others are less receptive. They say, do we have to approve this on? Well, we don't approve it. Well, it's online. I don't like it. Sorry, tough luck. As long as it doesn't take away from your JD program, it's not the ABA's business. Dean at Cumberland Law School, we proposed an SJD program in law, religion, and community while I was the dean there, and the first letter I got back from the ABA said, we don't think this program is necessarily sufficiently deep and with sufficient quality to justify the awarding of an SJD. And I wrote back and said, well, my university thought it was okay. The Southern Association approved it. None of your business. And they said, fine. Now, what they were really saying was, who would go to your school for an SJD? They're going to go to Harvard for an SJD. They're not going to go to one of these schools down the food chain. But we had the faculty we had the resources to offer that program, and it was a good program. I'm glad that it was created, and it's really not, there's no quality review. There should not be any quality review of these programs. So that's, again, something that comes up in questions asked to us all the time. And if it's a post-JD or other than JD program, it can be online. And then 3, limited exceptions. In the spirit of experimentation, you can get approval. Now, I've been there 9 months. You know, I like technology. I enjoy technology. I believe in technology, in the future of legal education. So far, I think I've had 3 people call me or write with requests for limited exceptions. Now, you know, I'm not, my eyes work, my ears work. There's a lot more going on that probably requires a limited exception than 3 people in the course of a year. One of those 3 I have approved. And one thing I would say to you, if you're running things that either are on the borderline, doesn't have to be synchronous, you know, call or write. Let's talk about it. One of the things that's going to happen for us to move forward in this area is we're going to have a full inventory of what's going on. We're going to have honest assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, so that when we get around to writing standards or interpretations to deal with this, they're going to be able to be based on information. If the decision makers are people who are uninformed or hostile, perhaps, to distance education, what is it that we can do to open their eyes to the fact that it works well? How can we change their attitudes? And simply not bringing proposals forward, particularly when they're required, it seems to me is the wrong way to go. I also put the site visit teams together, and one of the things I will instruct the site visit teams to do next year is to make much more inquiry than has been made about what's happening with distance education and technology in the curriculum. My own view is that people are going to schools, and a lot of them are not even asking the question. And some of you have probably been visited, and you're doing an online course. And, you know, it's just not getting into the report. Now, if under the current standard you should be called on that, then so be it. Let's call you on that, and let's try to get the standards to move forward. I think all of this just has to be brought out and be much more on the table. The conversation should have begun a while ago. It really needs to begin now. I'm pleased to say that John Siebert, who's the new consultant, is interested in moving this forward, and next year the Standards Review Committee is going to focus on this. One of their major initiatives next year will be to work on trying to do something with these temporary guidelines to make them more current, more workable, and more friendly well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. I would like to see them be more friendly. We'll see how that discussion comes out. And so to the last page, to page 3 of my little handout, page. Well, the page that says, where do we go from here? Yeah, page 3. I need your help. Maybe we can do a little of this here today. If not, you can certainly send me my emails on the front page. If we're going to have standards and interpretations that are more friendly to distance education or technology-based education or whatever we want to call it, what should those standards say? As some of you may know, the Sections Technology Committee a year ago came forward with a report that said, well, what we should do is we should define, we should create something called technology-based education. We should stick it in Standard 305. For the techies, forgive me, Rick was giving you some things I didn't understand, and I'm making these references. They may not mean much to you. That's the one about study outside the classroom. Let's just think about technology-based education like study outside the classroom, stick it in that standard, and then you could at least do anything over 45,000 minutes. But I ask you, is technology-based education, is distance education, more like classroom education or more like a clinic? I mean, 305 is the study outside the classroom, clinical education, externships. I mean, some of distance education may be like that, but a lot more of what people are trying to accomplish with distance education is to do substitutes for what we're doing in the classroom. Do we really want students to have to trade off between doing a clinic and doing distance education? Maybe, but it doesn't strike me that's necessarily a full solution to our problem. Do we really think that one should be able to get a JD completely online, the Concord model? Most people I talk to, even who are very pro-technology, pro-distance education, oh, no, we shouldn't have fully online. Well, then are we just talking about how many units? Now you can get 3, it'd be better if it were 6. Is that the way we're going to do this? We're going to do 3, then we'll move to 6, and 5 years from now it'll be 9? I mean, that sort of incremental approach may be helpful, but it doesn't get at the principle that we really need to, the concept that we really need to talk about. If we start allowing a lot more distance education, what does that do to the idea of residency? Does 700 minutes of class per credit mean anything when we start to talk about education that is going to be more and more not in a classroom environment? We all know that when we teach a seminar, many of us when we teach a seminar, we meet for 5 weeks and then we don't meet for 5 weeks so the students can write their papers, and then we meet again and the students deliver their papers. I mean, is that really 700 minutes per credit of class time? Probably not. And we just have fudged that over the years. Maybe we count an individual office meeting. The 700 minutes, the whole idea of residency, is it just seems to me something that can't really survive in the current environment and what we're likely to see in the future. So what's the substitute? Is it just passing a test? Most of us don't really believe, I think, that the test is enough to figure out whether people have got it or not. We sort of rely on the fact that we test them, and we've also made them come to class or do some reading, and don't we often say, they know a lot more than they were able to show on the exam, and that gives us some comfort. So, what's going to be the substitute for the 700 minutes, or the idea of residency, if we're going to just basically allow much more integration of online or distance education, or asynchronous, however you want to think? How are we going to figure out what should pass muster? And I don't have a good idea to propose to you on that yet. But I just suggest to you that doing this, move it from 3 to 6 or lump it in with clinics, is really not what we ought to be talking about. We ought to be thinking much more broadly and much more deeply. And let's try to come up with something that'll work for 8 or 10 years, instead of just some Band-Aid approach that lets the 3 or 4 of us at the law school who would like to do a little more online teaching, do a little more online teaching. One of the things I suggested in that list there is maybe we should have the standards require a school to have a plan for the use of technology in their educational program. Libraries have to have collection development plans. Law schools have to have self-studies that have a plan for the future of the law school. If technology is going to be an increasingly important part of the educational environment experience for law students, maybe we should require a school to have a plan. Now maybe that plan could be, we don't believe in technology here at Chico State Law School. We believe in the classroom environment, and our technology is the pencil and the paper. Well, at least that's a plan. But it would open up some possibilities for schools that are more interested to come forward with something that could be justified, that would help decision makers who maybe aren't as enthusiastic about technology understand what you're doing and understand that it's not just bells and whistles, that this is serious business that you believe provides quality education to your students. So maybe in the Q&A we can talk a little bit about that. What is it you want? You just want a few more units? You want a fully online environment allowed? What is it that you think we ought to require, again, as a minimum, as we move forward. Ideas that come to you later on, if you've got committees at your school who are developing these kinds of plans, I would love to see them. It would help me in my work with the committee, Standards Review Committee, to have a much clearer idea of what schools are doing out there than I currently have. I think that's the only way we're going to really start to move this ball forward. So I will stop with that, and we can open it up for questions to Rick, for questions or comments to me, and if there's a will to split the group, then we'll do that.
I'm curious, you have an open mind about this, it's obvious. I'm curious about committee and council, how representative you are of them. Because one of our concerns about the ABA is that Luddite U, which really wants to stick with pencil and paper, catches hell for it if the ABA has decided it's a good idea to go with technology. It really isn't open-minded. It really isn't a laboratory schools.
Well, I'm pretty direct, pretty open guy. The answer to that question is I'm much more interested in this than most. But, there is a level of interest, there's a growing level of recognition that this is an issue sort of like the debt load issue. Some issues just aren't going to go away. And this is one of them. And I would say to you, as somebody that is interested in, and again, I don't really know what I think about, for instance, the Concord model. I've been, I know some of the folks there. I've seen their demo and so on and so on. And one of the things, let's assume they wanted to apply for approval. They got a lot of problems in getting approved beyond the fact that they offer courses online. They don't have a tenured faculty. They don't have a building. There's a lot of stuff they don't have. And I think for them, one question is going to be, what's their plan for doing all of that? And if they did it, it might cost $45,000 a year to go to Concord, in which case you could quit your job, move to Boston and go to Suffolk for about that. So I'm not sure that, their cost model is played out, just substituting online for classroom experiences. I don't know that, but I'm sure they're thinking about that. But I think the key has got to be educating people, and it starts at your own school with your colleagues and your administration, getting them more and more understanding about what's going on, making sure they're putting the pressure on. One of the things I will say to you is that one of my goals in my 2 or 3 years at the ABA is to try to get people who are very busy people to spend a little time and see what's happening. I think it's very hard, frankly, and I don't think most of you probably seen the Concord demonstration. And I think it's very hard to see what they're doing. And to say that that is inherently and obviously totally inferior to the educational experience that's being delivered, at the worst ABA-approved law school in America. They know more about what their students are doing in terms of class prep. They have a much better idea of whether students are paying attention than we have. If you're on Law Prof, you saw the discussion recently about disconnecting classroom environments from the internet so people wouldn't be able to go, do their email. And of course, you can do your email offline and then hook up when you get out of class. So I'm not sure they can really stop that by But anyway, I don't know if that's a response to your question. But I think education's got to be the key. And if schools are just doing things that clearly violate the standards, I'm not suggesting that they are, but let's assume for a moment there's a lot more going on than permission is being requested. That's not the way. We're lawyers here. That's not the way to move the ball down the road. So, if nothing else, if there's an overwhelming underground economy in this stuff, you know, one of the ways to get things moving is to say, my God, there's so many things that are against the law out there, we've got to change the law. We can't enforce it.
I think I think the ABA has to own part of the problem. And there's a message in the way the guidelines are written that basically says, we don't understand this stuff and we don't care.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you don't really feel like picking up the phone under those circumstances, especially, as Rick knows, I had a really fairly hard time getting some fairly concrete questions answered. Not because there was a will not to answer them, but just because, you know, there was sand in the machine and I had a course that was starting.
Right.
Putting that all aside, on an aspirational level, it seems to me that it would be a very good thing to encourage experimentation by having the temporary guidelines treat online instruction no differently from independent study. There is no arguable distinction one can draw between independent study and online instruction, except that online instruction may be much more like classroom instruction than independent study.
Right.
And if schools were permitted to do that, to just carry online courses as within their independent study curricular rules, school by school, a whole lot more experimentation would take place and a whole lot less guilt would take place and a whole lot more reporting would take place.
Right.
So that's one piece of it. The other thing that in these meetings I always feel fairly lonesome about is that I think the ABA is not taking a strong enough stand on looking at what we do or what we're even thinking about doing with respect to online instruction. And that's demonstrated by the fact that at the keynote on, I guess, yesterday morning, right, the person who was here at our invitation was describing this kind of teaching as less costly and less labor intensive. Well, I'm here to say, and I bet most of the folks who've done it are here to say that it's more labor intensive, and that I want to see guidelines from the ABA acknowledging that, you know, and I want to see that because that's how classes got smaller, and that's how libraries got built, and that's how, you know, that's what accreditation's for and about. But right now, it cuts the wrong way both ways.
Yeah. I think your latter point's interesting. You know, I think we're a long way away from requiring a school to offer online education to some of its students. I mean, if you just look at the standard relating to experiential clinical learning, you don't even have to offer clinical education to every student. You just have to make it available.
Right.
I think we're a long way away from even that. But
when you do, but when you do,
right,
don't you have to, and the clinical guidelines start to get at that. There are labor-intensive things that one does.
Right.
When one does it, to do it well and to do it professionally, isn't it important, isn't there a distinction between having a faculty member do it and having somebody who's just sort of sitting there at home and reading student postings do it?
Right.
Wouldn't that be a useful line to draw?
Right.
Wouldn't it be a useful line to say, how many people can you reasonably carry in a semester on, you know, taking 3 credits on, you know, obviously there's a lot of work that has to go into that.
Yeah, and this is exactly the kind of thinking that I think will be helpful, you know, to me in trying to develop my own, you know, current ABA and my post-ABA life, whatever that may be, thoughts on this. So, great. Yeah.
Did Chicago, Kansas submit a proposal for an online?
That was before my time. I don't know if they, did you know anything about that, Rick? I thought that they had submitted it and pulled it back, but I don't know. I've only been there since last August, so that is not a matter that's currently on anybody's agenda. Yeah, Jim?
I think it would be really neat if we had an assessment component in each of these experiments and some method of distribution of those assessments.
Well, you know, part of the experiment is supposed to be that you send a report about what, you know, your experience was, And, you know, I've gotten a few of those.
They're about this thing. There aren't very many of them, are there?
No. Some of that's our fault. You know, I mean, I don't want to play my violin for you, but there are two of us at the ABA with law degrees, you know, and a few other people like Rick with professional expertise to offer. You know, for 184 approved law schools and eight new ones that are in one form or, you know, piece or another of the approval process. And it's a merry-go-round. I mean, the idea that, you know, we'd be able to sit back and think about some of this stuff, I mean, it's been a rush. And, you know, I've said, I take back everything I said about how long it took the ABA to respond to questions that I had asked in the past, because, I mean, it's just, you know, from foreign lawyers who want to know whether they can take the bar in New Mexico, to convicted felons, to students who didn't get the grade they deserved, to faculty who were getting denied tenure, to, I mean, all of these questions come to us in addition to the meta questions that really, you know, we get paid too much to think about those questions, quite frankly. But it's a small but mighty army. We're going to have one more person on July 23rd, which will help quite a bit. There was another, yeah.
Those of us, Barry, that are library directors and IT directors, we've done technology plans before, and we certainly, even though they're not required, when they send you a sabbatical or you're at a new law school and trying to get accreditation,
right,
you're going to make those part of the package you're sending out the team to look at, so
yes,
they have those.
The technology plans, in terms of the technology for the administration of the law school and the technology in the library, in fact, is now, I think, required in the 700s somewhere. I'm talking about a plan for technology as a part of the curriculum. You know, which is something as simple as we have Westlaw, and we teach people how to use that.
Right.
To, we've got a plan, you know, for making certain, for having a robust online course environment, and all of our students are required to take at least 2 courses online. I don't know.
You know, we have some supervision of the ABA does over, you know, the core collection and that,
right,
that type of thing. I'm wondering if we're going to get to the point where the ABA will take a look at the number of electronic databases that a school offers. The web pages, you know, looking at web pages and what should be the essential elements of a good web page that will serve the interest of the school and the ABA. Are they going to get involved in those?
Well, the library standards changed. Rick can speak to that a little better than I a year or so ago. I mean, we don't. They're not nearly as dependent on volume count, and they allow people to
access
report
rather than ownership.
You know, you got to remember that the accreditation standards are minimums, and the accreditation standards, although perhaps one could say that in occasional instances they have led, have mostly followed. And I must say, as a former dean, that's fine by me. I mean, I really think that the goal here ought to be not to set the ABA out as something that drags schools along, but rather that the accreditation, and again, let's not say the ABA, let's talk about the accreditation environment, is something that allows flexibility, allows sufficient creativity, allows schools to have different missions, and to go about achieving those missions. That happens now. Some schools are much more oriented toward practice. Some schools much more oriented toward theory. You know, we're sitting here in Boston with Northeastern very close by, which has a very unique mission that can fit within the ABA criteria. Right now, technology, particularly distance education, is one of the things where there is the least amount of flexibility. So I think rather than saying we got to get the standards to make certain that everybody has online, or make certain there's no more than N students per online section, I think we just, the first goal has to be to allow the same sort of figure out a way to have the same sort of flexibility with technology in the educational program that we currently allow with skills education in the program. And that's where we, you know, that's where the blockage is. Obviously, there's more going on. You know, we just need to get out of the way a little bit, as opposed to trying to pull everybody along. Yeah.
One of the things, I think there's a there's almost a subculture of distance education going on now because of the lax way in which the attendance policies are being enforced by ABA. And the fact is, you can have, most schools don't have a real formal attendance policy with any repercussions. And students, with all the development of the course pages and stuff that are going on, the fact is a student can sign up for a class and go to about 2 of them and use the course page as sort of a distance learning model.
Again, that shouldn't be happening.
Right.
Now, maybe every 7 years, people show up for 2 days to class. And, what would you have, and again, forget the ABA, what would you have your regulators do? I mean, do you really want an on-site police officer that comes around once a week and takes attendance in your classrooms? I know of one instance where attendance was so bad and the students were getting up in the middle of class and going out to the bathroom or having a cigarette and coming back, and it really bugged a couple of people on the team, and they got, really hammered, and they had to put swipe cards in. So there was a period of time when the students had to come into class and swipe. I would say, from being on a lot of site visit teams and from now reading a lot of reports, that the teams make an effort to see what schools do about attendance. And, the rule doesn't say everybody has to be in every class. It says the school shall have a mechanism for assuring attendance. And if that's being ignored, then, I think that has a lot to do with a lot more things than the fact that there's a nice substitute in distance education.
Well, I think the point is that right now, all you really have to do is schedule a room, and you can offer what essentially is a distance education course as long as you've got a room meeting 1 to 3 times a week.
Well, that's kind of where I was heading at the beginning. I mean, if it's received in a classroom, why can't it be received?
Well, I just think you have to, I think the ABA is going to have to take a look at the attendance policy and the need for brick and mortar, in attendance in connection with distance learning. I mean, I don't think you can ignore that because right now it's being honored in the breach.
Right. Well, again, any ideas you have about how we can do that would be much appreciated, because that's what I was saying. How does the idea of residency work? That's really what attendance is designed to get at with the residency rules. How does that work in an environment that's largely online? They would have spent a heck of a lot of money here if all they would have had to do is have a giant server. There's still something about the physical place. How are we going to, make it all work together? Yeah.
But how, the more online courses we offer means that the fewer students will be physically present.
Maybe so, maybe not.
Well, if somebody can sign up for 2 or 3 online courses, they can maybe knock one day off their schedule where they physically have to go to the school. I think most students would probably want to do it that way. And then how do we justify these facilities? Many of us who direct libraries see our libraries now as ghost towns because of the online resources we have. Many of us work in law schools that even during the academic year, Fridays, the place is dead. From May through August, the place is dead unless we have bar review, maybe a very, very limited number of courses. So I think what law schools have to think about is they're going to still have the nut to pay of maintaining their physical facilities and staffing it, and they're going to have to put more resources into these online courses. And there's got to, one is going to e-wave the other.
Well, how about a choice? You can have the goal here is to support a sound program of legal education. If you support that with a giant server and home delivery, or you support that with a big building and everybody's got to come in.
But we were talking about more as a mix, where people have, it's not all online or it's not all in class, but then the schools are in a position to have to support both.
Right.
And we all are dealing with limited resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying there's a happy solution. Yes.
I think we're going about this, and we all are, looking at it with the regulations we have. And to use a cliche, it's sort of thinking from what we know and thinking in the box. Maybe what we should be looking at instead of regulation is what is more effective teaching and learning. I mean, how much of the online is effective? So if we went at it from a point, because I don't think we've done that, the traditional legal education assessment is our strong point. Maybe going after, sort of starting with this fresh look at what legal education is, and looking at online legal education, looking at it, what is effective for students, what is effective, what can we actually do. So instead of looking at it from a point of regulation, looking at it from an endpoint of what is effective.
Absolutely. I mean, the move to outcomes-based standards is a big deal in accreditation, sort of across the board now. Yeah.
But especially since we're moving with this instead of trying to think.
Yeah, the problem is this has to be done on the fly. We're not going to close down legal education for a few years and think about it afresh. We've got to kind of do this as we go. Yeah.
Move back in the box for a moment. I just want to make sure I understand something. The distance education guidelines are written in terms of when you can qualify a course from 56,000 minutes of instruction to 304.
That's correct.
So, as you said, almost all schools require more than 56,000 minutes. Is it true then that any school can figure out what class hours or what credit hours correspond to the excess beyond 56,000 and allow distance learning type courses to fit in so they still have traditional courses to match up with the 56,000?
I think that the answer to that is probably yes.
That's probably, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. People will call me and they'll say, "I've got a really, really good student here who just hasn't taken the LSAT. We really want to let the student in. Can we do it?" And my response is, "You really want me to answer that question?" You called me. My answer is no. It violates the standard. But is there life imprisonment? Is that a death penalty issue? I mean, why are you calling me? Why are you calling me? This issue is coming up more and more. There's lots of ways students go to conditional admit programs, okay, and then go into law school from there. Technically, you're not supposed to count those units. Well, what if you require 80 units other than that, and then you count those 8, and now they can graduate with 88? I mean, my answer here should be, because I'm the regulator, no, those can't count. But my answer as a lawyer trained in Southern California in the 60s, who really is a crit at heart, is that's a very good argument.
But the problem is the correspondence standard. It's not in the guidelines. It's in that you can't give credit for language.
Can't give credit for.
Except under the guidelines.
Right. So you have your JD is for 80 credits.
That's what I'm
in
saying.
class, and then you have a supplementary requirement that you can't get your degree unless you have an additional 10 credits consisting of the following.
Or 8 credits and this experience. That's right. You have to have a lot of will.
Well, and when it gets to that point, when we're doing that sort of manipulation to get to a place where a lot of people want to go, then the best way to get at this is not to just tolerate the end runs, but to get back to the fundamental issue and see what we can do, to restructure the whole thing. One of the things I would say, we're almost out of time, and we haven't had. There may not be questions for Rick, but we can stick around a few more minutes if people have them. At the annual meeting, I know you're all going to attend the ABA annual meeting in Chicago in early August, but at that there is a committee in the section called the Out of the Box Committee, which was appointed by the current chair, Diane Yu, to do some thinking outside the box, and there are several different little working groups. One of them's on technology. Peter Martin's heading that effort up, and Peter has developed 4 or 5 scenarios about technology and distance learning, that kind of runs the gamut from the one course online to the full-blown Concord model. And on Saturday, August the 4th in the afternoon, that committee will present a program where these different working groups will briefly present their ideas. There's one on professionalism, there's one on student loans and financing, legal education, there's one on technology, and there's one more I can't remember. And then we'll break out into small groups and talk about these various scenarios that people have developed. So if any of you are either from Chicago or are going to be in Chicago for the ABA meeting or a Cubs game, you might come by on Saturday, August 4th, and participate in that conversation. John Siebert, Jim White did a lot of amazing things for American legal education. John Siebert, I think, has had a very good first year. We're looking at a lot of changes with respect to the way we deal with foreign study opportunities. A lot of changes in the works, I think, that legal education will find to be helpful. And I think John is open to looking seriously at this issue. And I think there's a window of opportunity here that we need to get our foot in and make sure that the window doesn't close. And hopefully, if people will continue to be creative, come up with suggestions, and keep pushing, that window can be opened a little bit more, every month that goes by. And I really would encourage you to let me know, what you're doing and how it's working. That sort of information base is going to be extremely helpful in educating the various committees and the council about what's happening out there and how well students are responding to it. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what's going to make the difference. I mean, you all had to start by educating your faculties and getting them to approve you doing this. And the council and the committees can't be any harder to convince than your own colleagues. So we just need to give them a good shot at it and hope that we can make some progress. Thanks a lot for coming.